welcome back, Highlanders, to the second lecture video for Chapter 9. Remember, in that first lecture video, we talked about the resource market, focusing on the most common resource, which is labor, and then we talked about the loanable funds market. We're going to continue talking about these macroeconomic markets today by talking about the foreign exchange market. So the foreign exchange market is the market in which the currencies of different countries are bought and sold. Right. So again, this is the market in which the currencies of different countries are bought and sold. Right. So the price in the foreign currency market is just called the price of foreign currency. So that should be pretty easy to figure out. And then the quantity is just the quantity or amount of foreign currency. Right. So when we're talking about the price of the US dollar, we might be talking about it in terms of how many dollars a euro or a British pound could buy, or how many dollars a Peruvian sol or Mexican peso might buy. So that's what we mean when we're talking about the price, right, of those particular items in terms of the dollars. Or if we're talking about the price of foreign currency, right, again, we're talking about how much that foreign currency the dollar can buy, right? So again, this is a market in which students tend to get confused in, right? It's fairly easy to get confused in this type of market, but let's go through it and make sure we understand how it works. So again, we're going to go ahead and graph out our foreign exchange market. And again, on the vertical axis here, we're going to put price like we normally would, only going to put P subscript FC. This is the price of our foreign currency. And down here on the horizontal axis, we're going to put quantity like we normally would, but that's quantity subscript FC for the quantity of foreign currency. And then, as per usual, we're going to have an upward sloping supply of foreign currency. This is a market that works just like any other. And then you're going to have a downward sloping demand for foreign currency. And where these two curves intersect, you better believe that we're going to have that market equilibrium. So this is the equilibrium quantity of foreign currency. That's where the amount of foreign currency that people want to buy is exactly equal to the amount of foreign currency that people want to sell. And this is the equilibrium price of foreign currency, or again, the exchange rate that brings that quantity of foreign currency into that perfect equilibrium. Okay, so that's what your foreign exchange market looks like. Now, we're going to talk about what each of these where each of these curves comes from and what they represent here in a minute. But I know it's kind of been a bit of a rough chapter with a lot of graphs and not a lot of fun. So let's add a little bit of fun to it, right? So with that in mind, I've got a short video clip here from the movie Dodgeball, right? Again, it's easy to get confused in the foreign exchange market. It is the market that confuses students the most, and I think confuses the general public the most. As an example, let's take a look at this quick video clip here.
So that's the deal. We got 30 days to raise $50,000, or average shows us history. I got 10 minutes, I'll open it up to some Q&A. Oh, you don't have to raise your hands, it's more of an open forum, but yeah, okay, Owen, kick us off.
Yes, Peter, and I'm just spitballing here, but why don't we pay it off in Canadian dollars and save ourselves some money?
All right, just so you know, if that's a route that you're interested in traveling, it's 50,000 American, it would be 70,000 roughly Canadian dollars.
How are we going to come up with $120,000?
Oh, no, you don't add them together. And technically, Peter, I'm sorry to say this, but it's more like $73,313.
But it doesn't matter. We can't come up with $50,000.
All right, so again, as you can see, Owen was getting pretty confused there in terms of how this foreign currency or foreign exchange market works, right? So let's try to make sure that you don't get as confused as Owen did, right, by going through this particular graph. All right. So before we actually go into shifting this graph and what those shifts mean, we need to talk a little bit about what changes in the exchange rate are and some definitions here, including an appreciation of a currency. So appreciation is an increase in the value of a currency relative to foreign currencies. So if we're using the US dollar as our home currency, and we say that the US dollar appreciates, that means that the US dollar can buy more euros. Right, so for example, if we have an exchange rate where $1 US is equal to 1 euro, right, meaning that if you went over to Europe and you wanted to exchange your money and you want to exchange 100 US dollars, then you can buy, say, 100 euros with those 100 US dollars. Now, if for whatever reason the dollar started to appreciate, meaning that it could buy more euros, then it might be an example where 1 US dollar could buy 2 euros, and therefore, again, your 100 US dollars over there could now buy 200 euros. So again, the dollar being able to buy more euros is an example of that dollar appreciating. Right. Now, depreciation is a reduction in the value of a currency relative to a foreign currency. And this would mean that the dollar can buy less euros. So if we said that the dollar depreciates, let's say now the dollar can only buy a half of a euro, then when you go over there with your $100 to Europe, then you're only going to be able to buy 50 euros with the $100. Right? So depreciation is a reduction in the value of a currency relative to foreign currencies. Again, that's your dollar being able to buy less of that foreign currency. So just to make sure that we are clear with this, when your dollar appreciates, that means your dollar can go further in the other countries for the value for the currency for which it appreciates, right? So, for example, if the dollar can buy more euros, then your dollar is going to be able to go further in Europe. You're going to have more purchasing power over in Europe. That's also going to make the things that you import from Europe a lot cheaper, and it's going to make the things that Europe tries to import from the United States more expensive, right? Because when the dollar can buy more euros, that's the same thing as saying that the euro can buy fewer dollars. So if the dollar appreciates relative to the euro, then that means that the euro depreciates relative to the dollar. Again, if the dollar appreciates relative to the euro, then the people in the United States will find European goods cheaper to import because, again, their dollar can go further in Europe, and so they'll probably import more, right? Again, when the euro depreciates relative to the dollar, that means that Europeans will find American goods more expensive, right? So they're probably going to import less from the United States, meaning that the United States is going to export less to Europe because, again, it's just more expensive to buy American goods when your euro has depreciated relative to the dollar. So is appreciation a good thing? Well, appreciation is a good thing if you are trying to buy things from other countries. It's definitely good that your currency appreciates relative to that foreign currency, right? But appreciation is not a good thing necessarily if you are trying to sell things to other countries, right? Because they're going to be less eager to buy things from your country if, again, their currency has depreciated relative to your currency, right? So keep those things in mind. If the dollar were to depreciate, that means that we could buy fewer European goods, or our dollar would not stretch as far in Europe. So again, we would import less, and Europeans would import more from the United States, and the United States would export more, right? So again, whether I'm asking is something good or bad in economics, it's usually good or bad for one group of people or another. Again, the appreciation of the dollar is good for importers. It is bad for exporters. The depreciation of the dollar might be bad for importers, but it would be good for exporters. So keep that in mind as we're going through this particular graph. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the demand for foreign currency and where it comes from. So the demand for foreign currency is calculated by our imports plus our capital outflows. So imports is, again, the things that we buy from other countries. So, for example, why do we want a Mexican peso? Well, we want it so that we can buy goods from Mexico, right? Why do we want a European euro? Well, so that we can buy goods from Europe. So we add in those to those imports these things called capital outflows. And capital outflows is when we take our money and we want to invest it in foreign banks and businesses. So it's domestic money invested abroad. So, for example, if you have a bunch of US dollars, but you want to invest in, say, you want to put your money in a Mexican bank or a European bank, then you're going to need to first translate that money into that foreign currency. So into those Mexican pesos or into those European euros or wherever you're trying to invest that money, right? So with that in mind, right, this idea that we want to invest money abroad is going to increase our demand for foreign currency or increase our demand for pesos or euros if we want to put more money abroad. So what might cause us to want to put more money abroad? Well, if the interest rates in foreign banks increase, well, then we might want to invest more in those foreign banks because now those interest rates or rate of returns we can get are going to be higher than what we could get in our domestic banks. So, for example, if U.S. banks are paying you 1% on your savings account, but a bank over in, say, Sweden is paying you 6% on your savings account, you might be more inclined to put your money in that Swedish bank rather than putting that money in the U.S. bank. Right, so with that in mind, you're going to want some more of those for the more of that foreign currency so that you can invest in those foreign banks when you see their interest rates rise. So with that in mind, our demand for foreign currency, like all our demand curves so far, is downward sloping because as the dollar appreciates, or as that dollar can buy more foreign currency, and another way to think of this is as that foreign currency depreciates, then people can import more and invest more in other countries, right? So for example, if the dollar appreciates relative to the euro, then that means that, again, we can afford more of those European goods, right? So we're going to have more imports, and we can, and it's going to be more lucrative to buy those euros and invest in those European banks. So you have more capital outflows, right? So again, the demand for foreign currency is downward sloping because when that dollar appreciates, you're going to have more imports and more capital outflows. If that dollar were to depreciate relative to the foreign currency, then again, we'd be importing less and having less of those capital outflows, right? So keep that in mind. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and graph this out. So once again, we are going to draw ourselves a vertical and horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, we're going to have the price of foreign currency, and on the horizontal axis, we're going to have the quantity of foreign currency, right? And once again, we're talking about having a downward sloping demand for foreign currency. And when we talk about the demand for foreign currency, again, we're referring to these imports plus capital outflows. So again, think about why you want, oh, didn't mean to do that. There we go, we're back into it. So again, think about why you want that foreign currency. Well, you want it so that you can buy goods from other countries, those are imports, or you want it so you can invest in other banks, other countries' banks and businesses, and that's what we call those capital outflows. All right. So with that in mind, let's say that we have a situation where $1 can equal 1 euro. Right, well, if that's the case, then there is a certain amount of foreign currency that you might want. So this is our quantity of foreign currency being demanded here. Call that QD1. Right, now, if $1 could all of a sudden buy 3 euros, then you'd be more inclined to switch your dollars over for euros so that you can buy more goods from other countries there in Europe, because again, it'd be cheaper to do so, or invest more in European banks and businesses, because again, your dollar can go further with that investment, right? So your quantity demanded for this foreign currency is going to be a lot higher when, again, the dollar can buy more euros, right? So again, the reason why I think a lot of students get confused on this graph is because this price here, this is the price of foreign currency. So again, when the dollar buys less euros, that means that foreign currency is more expensive, right, or higher. When the dollar can buy more euros, that means that foreign currency is cheaper or lower, right? So again, with that in mind, I want you to kind of think of it this way, that as you move up this vertical axis, right, then that is the same thing as saying that the foreign currency is appreciating, but the US dollar, that's our domestic currency that we're talking about here, is depreciating. And as you move down this vertical axis, again, that is foreign currency depreciating, and that is the US dollar being able to buy more because our foreign currency is now cheaper, appreciating, right? So again, I think a lot of students get confused with that, so make sure that you kind of understand how that works, right? But again, with the US, when we move up this vertical axis, the US dollar depreciates, the foreign currency, the euro in this example, appreciates. As we move down that vertical axis, the US dollar appreciates, but the foreign currency here, or the euro, depreciates. So again, make sure you understand that moving forward. All right, now, as per usual, if we are trying to draw a market equilibrium, we're going to have an upward sloping supply curve on this very same graph, looking something like this. This is our supply of foreign currency, and we're going to talk about where that comes from in a minute. But for now, let's just go ahead and draw that equilibrium. So this is the equilibrium quantity of foreign currency. Again, this is our QFC star. And then we have an equilibrium price of foreign currency. Call that PFC star. And we'll say that that equilibrium price of foreign currency is where $1 is equal to 2 euros. All right. So what happens if we have an increase in the demand for foreign currency? Right. So what happens if the demand for foreign currency increases? Right. So for whatever reason, right, we decide that we want to import more, or we want to invest more in other countries, or maybe the interest rate in the United States is lower than it was before, so it makes sense that we invest our money and put it into banks outside the United States, right? Maybe it's something like that, right? Or maybe we just have an increased preference for importing foreign goods from other countries, right? Then you're going to have an increase in the demand for this foreign currency, which, as always, an increase in demand is going to be a shift to the right of that demand curve. So we'll call this DFC2. And when you have this increase in demand for foreign currency, as you might have expected by now, it's going to cause both the quantity and price of foreign currency to increase, right? So when the demand for foreign currency goes up, if we want to import more, you better believe that we're going to be trading more dollars for euros. So our quantity of foreign currency is going to increase. Again, we can see that here from this graph as we go further to the right in our quantity demanded for foreign currency. But you're also going to see the price of foreign currency increase. And that should make sense. As people want euros more and more, the price of euros is going to go up, right? And again, we can see that here as we move this way along this vertical axis, as we get higher on that vertical axis there. Now, again, it's important to understand that the price of foreign currency going up means that our domestic currency, in this case the dollar, is depreciating. Right, so please make sure you don't get that confused. Now, for whatever reason, we are not as eager to import goods from other countries or invest in those foreign banks and businesses, then that's going to cause a decrease in the demand for foreign currency. And a decrease in demand, as you know by now, is a shift to the left. Again, that rule hasn't changed, so we'll call this DFC3. And where you see that decrease in the demand for foreign currency, again, where it intersects that old supply curve, we get a new equilibrium. That's going to make our quantity of foreign currency being demanded go down, which would make sense for not importing as many goods or investing as much in those foreign banks and businesses. And we don't need as many euros, so you're going to see a lower amount of euros being bought and sold. And again, because we don't want euros as much, then the price of euros is going to go down, right? So as is usually the case, when demand goes down, quantity and price both go down with it. So our quantity of foreign currency goes down, and our price of foreign currency goes down. And again, the price of foreign currency going down is the same thing as saying that the dollar appreciates. So again, make sure you don't get that confused on the exam or quiz. All right, so that is what it looks like. That's what the demand for foreign currency looks like, right? Again, nothing really different in terms of the mechanics of how the graph works, right? When demand goes up, they both go up. When demand goes down, they both go down. Increases or shifts to the right, decreases or shifts to the left. Remember, those rules never change. Again, just how you interpret this might be what could confuse you, right? The price of foreign currency going up is the dollar depreciating. The price of foreign currency going down is the dollar appreciating. So make sure you keep that straight in your head as you're answering these kinds of questions. So continue on, let's talk a little bit about the supply of foreign currency. Now, the supply of foreign currency is exports plus capital inflows. Exports, of course, is when we sell goods to other countries, and then capital inflows is when other countries want to invest in U.S. banks and businesses. Right, so again, if we're using the United States as our domestic country here, right, then again, whenever we sell goods to other countries, so whenever the U.S. sells goods to, say, Europe or Mexico, it's exporting. And then whenever Europe invests in U.S. banks and businesses, or Mexico invests in U.S. banks and businesses, we call that capital inflows. Right, so again, think of when you think of the supply of foreign currency, I want you to think of where do we get foreign currency? Where do we get those euros or those pesos? Well, if we sell a good over to somebody in Europe, they might pay us in their euros, so that's where we get euros. And then when people in Europe want to invest in U.S. banks and businesses, well, then they're going to dump euros into our banks and businesses, and that's another place where we would get them, right? So again, the demand for foreign currency is why do we want it? The supply of foreign currency is where do we get it? And we get foreign currency from exporting when those people in those other countries pay us in their foreign currency. And then, of course, when they want to invest in our country, they might do so using their foreign currency, right? So again, capital inflows is foreign money that is invested domestically, right? So when people in other countries put money in U.S. banks and businesses, and again, there's reasons why they might want to do that more or less. For example, if the United States starts raising their interest rates so that U.S. banks start giving people more or higher interest on their savings account, then that might encourage people in other countries to put their foreign currency in our U.S. Banks there, right? Because again, now they can get a higher rate of return from these higher interest rates in the United States compared to maybe a lower interest rate in their domestic country. And this curve, as you might expect, is upward sloping because as the dollar depreciates, again, as you move up that vertical axis, that is the dollar depreciating, or another way of saying that is foreign currency appreciating, then foreign countries are going to demand more domestic exports and they're going to invest more domestically. So as the dollar is worth less relative to the foreign currency, or as the foreign currency is worth more relative to the dollar, then people in other countries are going to be more likely to buy our goods, which counts as U.S. exports, or put their money in U.S. banks and businesses, which again are those capital inflows. So let's go ahead and graph that out and see what that looks like. So again, we're going to have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis here. We got the price of foreign currency looking like being measured here on the vertical axis. And we got the quantity of foreign currency being measured on the horizontal axis. And now we're going to have an upward sloping supply curve. And this is going to be our supply of foreign currency. And remember where we get foreign currency from exports plus those capital inflows. So let's abbreviate as cap in here, right? And again, understand why this curve is upward sloping, because when $1 is equal to something like 3 euros, people in Europe are not nearly as eager to buy U.S. goods or nearly as eager to invest in U.S. banks and businesses. So this would be the quantity of foreign currency supplied, right? But when, say, the euro appreciates so that $1 can buy 1 euro, or 1 euro can buy $1 instead of 1 euro buying a third of a dollar, then now all of a sudden you're going to have a greater incentive of people in Europe to buy U.S. goods, so U.S. exports will increase, and invest in U.S. banks and businesses, so the quantity of euros being supplied here is going to increase. So hopefully that makes sense. With that in mind, of course, you're going to have a downward sloping demand curve in this particular graph here. We're going to try to draw ourselves an equilibrium. So this is our demand for foreign currency, which if you remember is imports plus those capital outflows. Right. And where the two intersect, you're going to have an equilibrium quantity of foreign currency. This is where the amount of foreign currency being demanded is equal to the amount of foreign currency being supplied. And then you're going to have an equilibrium price of foreign currency, which again might be equivalent to $1 being equal to, say, 2 euros. Right? All right, so let's look and see. Let's clean it up. There you go. All right, so with that in mind, let's take a look at what happens when the supply of foreign currency increases and decreases. So if the supply of foreign currency increases, hopefully you know by now that that's going to be a shift to the right of the supply curve. You might have a supply curve starting to look like that. And that's going to happen if, again, the U.S. goods become more popular abroad. So we have an increase in exports. Or, again, if it's just maybe people are more eager to invest in U.S. banks and businesses for whatever reason, maybe that U.S. interest rate has increased relative to those foreign interest rates. Right? Either way, when the supply of foreign currency goes up, you can expect an increase in the quantity of foreign currency. That should make sense, right? As we supply more of it, there's going to be more of it out there, right? And then you're going to see a decrease in the price of foreign currency. So the price of foreign currency will go down. And now, again, in this case, when the price of foreign currency goes down, right, I want you to think of that as the foreign currency depreciating and the dollar appreciating. So again, when the price of foreign currency goes down, that's another way of saying that the dollar has appreciated. Right? Now, if we were to have a decrease in the supply of foreign currency, maybe a decrease in people's desire to buy U.S. goods when you're living in those other countries, or maybe a decrease in the desire to invest in U.S. banks and businesses. Maybe their interest rates went down relative to those foreign banks and what they're willing to pay. In any case, that decrease in the supply of foreign currency is a shift to the left. Again, all decreases are shifts to the left. That rule hasn't changed. And as per usual, that's going to cause quantity to move in the same direction as supply. So when the supply of foreign currency goes down, you're going to see the quantity of foreign currency go down with it. Right? You can see that here on this graph. It's further to the left than it used to be. Right? But you're going to see the price of foreign currency go up. Again, you can see that on the graph. Right? We're higher up on that vertical axis than we used to be. Again, the thing that I want you to remember here is that the price of foreign currency going up is the same thing as saying that our foreign currency has appreciated, which means that our domestic currency, the US dollar here, has depreciated. So again, make sure you keep in mind that the price of foreign currency increasing is the same thing as saying that the dollar has depreciated, or whatever your domestic currency is that you're referring to. All right, so make sure you understand how that works, right? With that in mind, right, again, this is the graph that I think confuses students the most, mostly because they got to think about it both in terms of the foreign currency and the domestic currency, right? So just kind of keep this idea in your head that as we go up that vertical axis, that is the dollar depreciating, but your foreign currency appreciating. As you go down that vertical axis, that is the foreign currency depreciating, and that is the dollar appreciating. Because again, we're measuring that vertical axis as the price of foreign currency. So make sure you understand that there moving forward, and you should be good to go on this graph. All right, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what happens when the foreign exchange market is in equilibrium, right? So equilibrium occurs when the supply of foreign currency equals the demand for foreign currency. Now, before we get into why this is important, let's talk a little bit about some definitions here. So a trade deficit is whenever a country imports more than we export, which again is what the United States tends to do a lot of. So we tend to import more than we export here in the US. Other countries might export more than they import, which is known as a trade surplus. Now I want to make this very well understood. A trade deficit isn't necessarily a bad thing, and a trade surplus isn't necessarily a good thing. A lot of people, when they hear the word deficit, they think, oh, that must be bad that we're importing more than we're exporting here in the U.S. Or when they hear surplus, they think, oh, that's automatically good that we are exporting more than we're importing, right? It's not necessarily the case. As long as all these exchanges are voluntary, then again, both sides are being made better off by these exchanges, right? So again, don't necessarily think it's good or bad when you have a trade deficit or a trade surplus, right? For example, I myself have a trade deficit at Walmart. I buy a lot more stuff from Walmart than Walmart buys, say, economic lectures from me. That doesn't make me worse off. I still voluntarily shop at Walmart because it makes me better off to do so, right? I do have a trade surplus with the University of California, Riverside, right? They buy more economic lectures from me than I buy, say, UCR sweatshirts or parking passes from them, right? So I use my trade surplus that I have with UC Riverside to support the trade deficit I have with Walmart. Again, I'm not necessarily worse off in either case, right? So again, don't look at deficits as a bad thing, and don't look at surpluses as necessarily a good thing. Just again, as long as these trades are voluntary, then they're all good. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the foreign exchange market in equilibrium. So in the foreign exchange market equilibrium, we know that the supply of foreign exchange is equal to the demand for foreign exchange. And remember where the supply of foreign exchange comes from, right? Remember that is going to be our exports plus our capital inflows. And remember where the demand for foreign exchange comes from, that is our imports plus our capital outflows. So we know in the foreign exchange market equilibrium that exports plus capital inflows is equal to imports plus capital outflows. Now we're going to rearrange this equation a little bit to make it a little bit more useful for us by using a little bit of algebra magic. So we're going to subtract imports from the right side of the equation. Wherever you do to the right side of the equation, though, you have to also do the left side of the equation in order to keep that equation equal to one another, or both sides of the equation equal to one another. So we're going to subtract imports from the right, which means that we are also going to subtract it from the left. And then we're going to subtract capital inflows from the left, which means we're also going to subtract it from the right. So again, using a little bit of algebra magic, we're going to rearrange this equation to look like this. Exports minus imports is going to be equal to capital outflows minus capital inflows, right? So again, that is going to be true when we are in that foreign exchange market equilibrium. So with that in mind, right, let's take a look at what this means. If we are operating at a trade deficit, remember a trade deficit is when imports are greater than exports. If that's the case, if we know imports are greater than our exports, then the left side of this newest equation that we created, exports minus imports, has got to be negative. Right? So again, if imports are greater than exports, then we know that the left side of the equation is negative. After all, if our imports are, say, 3, but our exports are 2, then that's going to be equal to a negative 1. Now, if the left side of the equation is negative, then what must the right side of the equation be? Well, also negative. Right? If the left side is negative 1, then that means that the right side also has to be negative 1. That's how an equal sign works. Right? So again, if we're operating in a trade deficit, then it must be the case that our capital inflows are going to be greater than our capital outflows. So cap in is going to be greater than cap out. And that means that more people are investing in the United States than the United States is, say, investing in other countries abroad. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, that's actually a good thing. Right? So a trade deficit isn't necessarily bad, right? It's not a bad thing that we're importing more from other countries than we're exporting to them, because all that means is that other countries are investing more in the United States than the U.S. is investing in other countries. So in other words, other countries see the United States as a good place to put their money, right? So again, right, in order to import more than we export, we have to get these this foreign currency or these euros from somewhere. Well, we get it from capital inflows being greater than capital outflows. Now, if we are running a trade surplus, or a trade surplus is when our exports are greater than our imports. And if our exports are greater than our imports, then it must be the case that the left side of the equation is positive. For example, if the imports are 3 and exports are 4, then the left side of the equation is positive 1. If the left side of the equation is positive, then again, the right side of the equation must also be positive. Again, if the left side is positive 1, then the right side must also be positive 1. Again, that's how an equal sign works. So now we know that capital outflows are greater than our capital inflows. Right. So again, if we are running a trade surplus, meaning that we are exporting more to other countries than we are buying from those other countries, well, then again, how are we going to do that? How are we going to export more than we import? Well, the only way that's possible is if our capital outflows are greater than our capital inflows, or that we're putting more money in these foreign banks and businesses than they are putting money in the United States. After all, where are they going to get the U.S. dollars to buy all these goods from us that we're exporting? Well, they get it from those net capital outflow, or situation where capital outflows is greater than capital inflows. Right. And so again, I want to make sure that we're kind of clear on some terminology. Whenever we use the word net capital inflow, that is when our capital inflows are greater than our capital outflows. If we use the word net capital outflow, then that is when our capital outflows are greater than our capital inflows. Right? So if you see that terminology used in other classes or on our quizzes or exams, just make sure you know what that means. All right, so hopefully you understand kind of what happens to that foreign exchange market in equilibrium. Let's go ahead and do some practice questions to make sure we understand how this foreign exchange market works. Again, it certainly can be confusing. So let's go ahead and practice and see how well we understand this stuff. All right, so our first practice question here says, if the dollar price of the English pound goes from $1.50 to $2, so basically we're saying that before a English pound could buy $1.50, now an English pound can buy $2, then what must be true of the dollar? Well, if the English pound can buy more dollars, then it must be true that the dollar has depreciated, or another way of saying this is that the dollar can buy fewer of these English pounds. Right? If the dollar has depreciated, then the English will find the U.S. goods cheaper, right? Or it's going to be cheaper to buy U.S. goods when their pound can buy $2 versus when it can only buy $1.50. So C is the answer you're looking for on this one, right? So again, if the price of the English pound goes from $1.50 to $2, that means that the English pound can buy more dollars, or the dollar can buy fewer English pounds. So the dollar has depreciated, and that means that the English will find U.S. goods cheaper, and the United States will find the English goods more expensive to buy, right? Again, this means that England will probably buy more goods from the United States, all right? So the U.S. will be exporting more. The United States will be buying fewer goods from England, so the United States would be importing less. All right, and then let's try this one. If equilibrium is present in the foreign exchange market and a nation is experiencing a trade deficit, remember a trade deficit means that our imports are going to be greater than our exports, right? If that's true, then again, that left side of the equation must be negative. That means that the right side must be negative, right? In which case the nation must be experiencing a net capital inflow, or again, a situation where capital inflows is greater than capital outflows, or more people are investing in the United States than say the U.S. would be investing abroad. Right now, if the question said that the nation was experiencing a trade surplus, that is where B must be the right answer, that the nation must be experiencing a net capital outflow, or capital outflows is greater than capital inflows. Right? C and D, with regard to the nation's inflation rate, right, that or the and interest rate, those aren't really affected by these foreign exchange markets in such a way that you need to worry about with this particular question. Right? So A is again the answer that you're looking for there. All right. So that is it, or that's going to be it here for the second lecture video in Chapter 9. When you come back for the third and final lecture video, we're going to be going over the what I call the granddaddy of them all, the aggregate goods and services market. This is a more difficult market to understand because it has two supply curves in addition to one demand curve. So 3 curves total and 2 potential types of equilibriums. And this is kind of the market that we're going to be using to relate to our business cycles of expansions and recessions, which we'll be doing at the end of this particular chapter. Right, so with that in mind, make sure that you come back for part 3 of Chapter 9, because that's going to be a very important lecture video moving forward for the rest of the course. That's it for now. Shoot me an email or come visit me in those office hours if you have any questions, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.